Hi there, this is Cindy Lou with CHR Partners, and I'm joined with Vince Hsieh, the partner at Cypress Capital. And today we're going to talk a little bit about really the human capital side in venture capital firms. And really, there's a lot of correlation to larger organizations. So welcome, Vince, and give the audience a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. Glad to be here today. Looking forward to the conversation. So I'm Vince Hsieh. I'm one of the partners here at Cypress Growth Capital, an investment firm based here in Dallas, Texas. My quick background here, I started my career in management consulting, working with private equity-backed companies that were in distress, doing corporate restructuring and turnaround work. Started my career there and then spent the last 16 years after that as an entrepreneur operator, launching, building, scaling, and eventually exiting two different industrial IoT SaaS startups, both of which exited to private equity in recap transactions. My second one was a company called Geoforce here in Dallas. Our first institutional investor at the time, we were about maybe call it 5 million or so in recurring revenue and have been bootstrapped to that point. Our first institutional investor, I guess 10 plus years ago, was Cypress Growth Capital. So even though I'm only been at Cypress now for about 6 months, I've known the Cypress team for over a decade as a portfolio company. Recently joined the investing side of the world, looking at tech companies that are kind of, we call the emerging growth stage or tweener stage, if you're talking about ages of people. Companies are generally between like 3 to 15, 3 to 20 million in revenue at the time of investment. All tech companies, mostly kind of bootstrapped or self-funded type companies that have grown in that scale and are looking for growth capital to help accelerate things as they move into the next phase of their business.
Thanks, Vince. So I was just thinking about when we first met, probably 8 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
You had just won the CFO of the Year award with the Business Journal. And I remember after getting to know you a little bit, just how focused you were on the human capital side of things. And I don't know if you know this, but a lot of CHROs are like, hey, if the job reports to the CFO, don't even take it, right? Like it's sort of like this. And so I was just really impressed with your focus on the people side of things. And it seems like, an early stage company, there's nothing more important. Like you won't make it, right, without that.
Yeah, for sure. The people side is what drives, in this case, I'm going to talk about tech companies or software companies, because at the end of the day, that's what's making everything work, especially at a scale of, 10 people, 50 people, 100 people. At a much bigger company, if one person's not good, they're, 1/10 of 1% of the output or the productivity of that company. But at a smaller company, if you have 50 people, one person's bad day is 2% of your productivity for the day. Or major impact to the, let's call it the value of your company is how good or how bad your people are. And so that's something that when I was an entrepreneur and operator, we focused quite a bit on, is making sure that the talent we brought in was up to par for what we needed to do. And even better than that, we're always looking for people who could be adaptable, resourceful, could really roll up their sleeves and do the right thing, but also have the ability to what I call helicopter up, to kind of think strategically or think like an owner about how to help grow the business or evolve the business over time. And I agree with you for sure. It's by far the most important thing, for instance, now as an investor that we look for in companies is not only is the founder and CEO high quality, but has he or she surrounded him or herself with a quality leadership team and a quality bench around them. Because ultimately we're investing not necessarily in the software code or the product or the addressable market that they're playing in. We're ultimately investing in this team of people to take our investment and grow it substantially over time. And that takes just the right types of people doing the right type of work every day.
Yeah, and I would argue that every company, no matter the size, right, should be this hyper focused on getting the right people in place and the right processes and systems. I'd be curious your advice that you give to typical founders that you guys invest in on the people side or in business in general, right? Like just in general.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier, we tend to invest in companies that are kind of 3 to 20 in revenue. So most of them are led by, especially as a tech company, an engineer CEO, if you will, who's done a great job building the product, building the initial product market fit, and getting traction with a good number of customers to get to 5-10 million in revenue or so. But what they usually lack on their team is a middle management or a senior leadership team to help guide certain functions like sales, like operations, like engineering, They tend to have, a few salespeople who go out there doing it, a few engineers who write the code or do whatever they're doing. And we advise them usually when we bring in our growth capital, is to help them grow the company, so, at a faster rate than they're already growing, by letting them, extend a little bit past their skis a little bit on investing in marketing or sales or product or infrastructure,
Mhm.
things like human resources or talent development or operations or accounting and things like that. And so
Mhm.
usually we advise them at the very beginning to let's plan out the org chart, not just for now, but for the next, 5 years, 10 years. And we don't need to name names yet, but let's start filling in like kind of the functions and the boxes. And then we kind of strategize with them about how we're going to fill those boxes in over time, using some of our growth capital, but also, of course, the profits and the money they're generating from selling to customers, which is ultimately the best way to raise money is to sell stuff. And so
Right.
we help them with things like looking at a job description and then ultimately going to help through our network or through, potentially helping them interview people like VPs of sales, VPs of finance or CFOs, heads of engineering or operations. Those are typically the roles that we don't usually see at our companies when we invest, but we can come in and either help them hire that role initially or top grade the talent they already have in there, help them kind of give a third party assessment of whether or not this person is up to snuff to be the VP of sales or the VP of whatever, is something we do. And we think that's kind of a day one thing with our investments, even ahead of some other things we might do around sales and marketing or product related things, because you got to get the people right first before you can, execute on the other plans.
Right. You're speaking my language here. I love what you said earlier about buying two shoe sizes
Mhm.
larger. So explain that concept. I've heard this for years and years, having been in startups and fast growth companies. The venture capital firms that we talk to are all always concerned about that.
Sure.
Explain that concept.
Yeah. So in a rapidly growing and evolving company where the company's not just growing like revenue or headcount or numbers, but also evolving into, let's say, new products, new markets, new types of things that they're selling. In a company that's growing and evolving, every day you're changing at a fast pace. So if you fast forward like 3 months, 6 months, a year, the company is a totally different company than it was 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. And if the company is going to be different, then the mindset and the skill sets and the kind of attitudes, if you will, or the way that people work of the company need to change as well. And so if you hire people that are good for you on day zero and you grow in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months into a different company, like I was describing, then those people are going to either have to grow with it, which is hard for people to grow that fast, or you got to hire someone who's already grown to that level and can sort of do both, both the day zero and day later type work. And so that's why we always advise people to hire roles for certain roles, of course, two shoe sizes bigger. Or I think in HR world, sometimes people call it +2 hiring. Someone who could be promoted twice in the role, because if you don't do that, then they're not going to grow or evolve as humans or as professionals as fast as your company's growing, and you're going to fall behind and have to rehire or fire someone in a few months anyway, or a few
Right.
quarters.
Well, I think what's interesting about the way you look at this versus like when I was in executive search, we used to do a lot of search work for VC firms. And it was always like the resume, like we need somebody who's already, grown it to 20 or 30 million. They were very focused on the resume. You're not just focused on the resume, but also on the agility of the person. Talk to me
Yeah,
about that.
so certainly the resume, you look at it, most people when they look at a resume, like a hiring manager, I don't know how many people I've hired before, but lots of people I've looked at resumes for. You might look at the headlines of, okay, they worked at IBM or Google or whatever company or whatever industry. You might look at a couple of the bullet points that have verbs in them and results and actions, the typical stuff that people are consulted to do, but you don't really get a feel for the person to actually talk to them. And the things that we really are looking for, again, going back to the foundation we're talking about here, is like a tech company that's growing or has venture capital investment in it or whatever, that's evolving and things like that. The things we're really looking for in those are, and this is going to sound very generic, but soft skills that you don't necessarily see in a resume, or if they say it in the resume, they're just saying they are, but they can't actually prove it till you literally talk to them or maybe talk to their references or actually honestly work with them. And those things we're looking for are things like the agility you just mentioned, resourcefulness, the ability to adapt pretty quickly and bounce with things. Because the one constant in a company like this is that nothing's constant. We go back to what we said a few minutes ago about growth and evolution. With that kind of stuff comes a lot of change, both with like what you're offering customers, what you can do, what your competition's doing, what your employees need. That involves and sudden impacts like COVID or sudden impacts that can happen in any industry. And so you need people who are resourceful enough to kind of figure things out, because you're generally going to be resource limited at a smaller scale company that's growing, and also have that agility you mentioned, the flexibility, the adaptability to sort of roll with the punches and adapt to what's happening on the scene and not be handheld throughout the process. And then the last thing I'll say on this point is that without that kind of mindset, those people are going to get really frustrated really quickly. And then if the worst you can have as an employer is a frustrated employee, especially if they hide that frustration. And then it's a downward spiral for everybody. And you don't want that. So you want to have people come in and be energized by the change, energized by everything we just described, not turned off by that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's a pretty unique skill set, right? Like you're kind of jack of all, but you have to also be master of all.
Yes.
Everything at that stage, or you're just dead in the water from a business perspective. You also referenced a very famous quote, "What got you here won't get you there." Talk
Yes.
to me a little bit about that guidance that you provide to founders and founding teams.
Yeah, and that's something that we try to suss out with our portfolio companies before we invest in them as part of the discovery process. And then if we even get that far, the diligence process with companies, is we kind of test with the CEO and the leadership team. Are they open to change? Are they open to advice? Do they have a growth mindset versus a knower or a fixed mindset? Are they the kind of people who learn, like, and this is gonna sound terrible, but in the age of Zoom, sort of looking at their bookshelf and see like what kind of books are they reading, honestly, and what kind of organizations or associations or types of things are they liking on LinkedIn that indicate that they got that mindset of growth, because that's ultimately what they need. Everything we talked about a few minutes ago about change and evolution and growth and rapid this and evolution and adaptability, we need that. It starts at the top of the leadership team. Do they have that in them to accept that statement that you repeated back to me about what got you here won't get you there? That's obviously not a unique thing that people have been saying that for years, but something that everyone truly appreciates or understands is this concept that you sometimes have to let go of the past, even if there's some loyalty to the employees who got you from here to there. And sometimes it's for the best for the employee to go work somewhere else too. So I've had a lot of growth at both my startups, and in every case we had to go through these different stepping stones of change and had to at times fire people who were, I'm gonna use an example since you talked about a finance earlier, like the bookkeeper who got you from 0 to 2 million is not the person who should be your accounting manager, your controller over your much bigger company. And in some cases, like I can still remember a few of these people, we let them go, in a generous severance in a nice way, and with, help with, references to other companies and things like that. And they went back to work at a smaller company and they thrived there. They actually were more energized working at that scale of company than working at a much bigger company where there was different levels of accountability, different levels of detail that were needed or whatever. And I can even speak to just me myself personally. The growth of my companies to a certain stage was fun for me, from the kind of the starting and building and and iterating process of building a company from literally nothing to something. That was fun for me. But when the companies got a lot bigger and it became a little bit more, let me call it administrative and more outward focused with the investors and things that are the owners of the company eventually, and not focus on building product or building the customer base or building the company itself, it wasn't as fun for me either. And it was better for me to go do something else as well versus staying in something and not appreciating and wanting to do it.
Yeah, the counter to that is I remember a company I was with in 08, 09 when we had to do a recap, and the board didn't want to go back and raise enough capital because they didn't want to get too diluted, right? And the challenge with that is that if you don't have that growth capital and you have to, all you're doing is just sort of, standing still. You have this team of people who are, used to that fast growth, right? Like they're hooked. It's like drugs. And suddenly, if you flatten out and you don't have the right financing to grow, you're going to lose those people because the personalities are like, hey, you brought me in here to grow, and they're so used to that, hockey stick, that if you don't have the right kind of financing and advice to help you grow the company, it's trouble too.
Yeah, you're totally right. I was talking about a few minutes ago, the let's say the bottom side of it. You're talking about the top side here is very true. And I think the biggest risk we have in today's kind of fundraising environment, where not only are interest rates, to say, generically higher, so it's harder to get, let's call it, debt, but also valuations on the equity side are substantially down from kind of the 2021 almost exaggerated highs, I would say. I mean, to be fair, not to sidetrack us too much here, we're still kind of above where we were before the highs of 21, just way down from where 21 was in terms of valuations. But my point is that valuations are down, so it's harder to get equity, or people aren't trying to do equity, so not raising enough money because they want to delay that. And
Right.
interest rates are higher on the debt side, so people are delaying cap raises or not doing cap raises or raising less than they probably should, to your point. And then growth is stalling out, or change is stalling out. And to your point, the high performers who thrive in that environment are looking for something else, then something that'll give them that adrenaline rush or the drug high you described earlier.
That's right. The consequences are very real. Okay, I have a question that we really didn't discuss, but I think you're living it at the moment. We have a lot of CHROs in our audience who are very interested in getting onto boards. And in some cases, it may not be a Fortune 500 board, but it might be a smaller company board. And there's a real difference, right, in being an operator in a company versus being on a board. Now you're on the board of one of your portfolio companies, and many of them, right? So describe to me the kind of mindset shift you needed to make to go from operator to board member.
So I would say this, I'll answer two ways. One is your exact question of operator versus board member, or operator versus an advisor, or tactical operator versus strategic board member. I'll answer that, but also sort of maybe part of your question might be like, how does a CHRO get onto boards? And I would say that the exposure I've had to heads of HR at both my tech company, startups and everything, and also just other ones I've encountered throughout my life, the best HR people are the ones who truly understand the actual business and how it makes money, understands the customer value proposition, understands how the product helps solve the customer's needs, understands how everything functions, and then offers HR as a strategic partnership to those other functions to help them grow the business, right? And the people who just sort of are in their focus lane are never going to be able to expand to leadership within their company, much less leadership on other boards. But the ones who truly understand the rest of the business, let's call it, are the best HR partners you could have. One of my best friends from business school, he used to work for the railroads here in Dallas. Like, I remember his kids used to say that my daddy plays with trains at work every day or something when they were a lot younger. He was a purebred operations guy. And I'll say this kind of unpolitically correct here, but he wasn't the most HR friendly person, I would say. Just, he was just a guy who, enjoyed his free time and fun time, and, just as a friend, said things that maybe weren't always appropriate sometimes. But he got hired as the head of HR at a huge Canadian railroad company. I probably shouldn't have said that, but a Canadian railroad company as the head of HR with no HR experience. What they wanted from him was that he had run operations for 25 years and knew the customers, knew the value prop of the company, knew what made the people inspired at his company to do good work. Right. And they hired him straight into this other company as the head of HR from the very beginning. This is probably 5+ years ago. And he kind of always is a good, I think, story for me for like how you become a successful HR person. It's having gone through the rotations of the business if you could at a bigger company, or just if you're not at a bigger company, just really investing the time to know the rest of the company. Right. That makes you a better leader within the company that will then translate into the opportunity to do boards. Your other question or your actual question, I should say, around how to make that pivot or whatever from, let's say, an operating role to more of a board or advisory role. I think, like, for me personally, in the last 6 months, making that transition to an investor role and advisor role, it's been sort of pivoting to, thinking only about strategic topics at a much higher level and across a broader spectrum, versus thinking about strategic and mostly tactical type things within one company, or my company, let's call it. So that's a big mindset shift that helps. I think the ability to be a little bit more pointed in some ways, so you can get to the point quicker, but also broader in certain ways that has more open-ended questions. When you're in an operator role, you have the luxury of a little bit more time to be able to, work with the same team and drill in on things, and maybe not be as efficient in your questioning, let's call it. At a board level, when you have much shorter attention spans, a much shorter amount of time to do things, you have to be more thoughtful, I would say, in your line of questioning, in your thought processes, and what you actually, rise to the topic of a board discussion or advisory discussion, because time is more limited. And, you really got to learn how to focus on, generically speaking, let's call it the forest and not every little tree, and be able to zoom out like that. I think it's valuable to companies. And what HR people can bring to the table in these types of settings, I think, is what Cindy, I know you believe, and I think everyone who's listening to this probably already believes this, but that people are by far the most important thing in a company.
Mhm.
I don't care if you're a technical company, you have product and all that, you still need to have people writing the code, designing the product, product managing, all that stuff. And so I think that's the perspective that often has been lost in boards in the past, where the focus maybe on, let's call it generically corporate strategy, not HR strategy or people strategy, and heavy focus on, like, let's say the financial side of things and share price and that type of stuff. And lost in some of that conversation has been the people side of that ultimately makes for better financials and better corporate strategy anyway. So
Right.
sort of just constantly, and this is why it's great that you have this group to constantly remind people in the greater ecosystem about that fact, and proving it through either data or just anecdotes or by doing it in the field.
Right. Well, I can tell you, I've done a lot of startups, and it's all about the people, because like I didn't have that MBA and I didn't have any of the methodologies or framework. It was just all about, can I hire the best people? Luckily, I came from executive search, so I knew how to do that. I didn't know how to do anything else.
The
But
best people can figure anything out, honestly. Like if you put the great people together, and here's the thing, you said people, plural, not person. It still takes a team. Like
yeah,
a team that's cohesive, has worked together before, especially whether
right.
that be in an academic setting, but even better, a professional setting. I'll
Mm,
always bet on a good team over a good product or a good market or a good whatever, because they'll figure it out. They'll be
yeah,
resourceful, they'll be smart, they'll figure it out, and they'll work their ass off to make it work, versus just a bunch of individuals who are tooling their
that's
thumbs
right.
or don't need direction from someone all the time.
That's right.
So
Yeah, my analogy is a great sitcom, right? Like Friends, like every single
mhm.
character on that show was awesome. Modern Family, NCIS. When you got everybody who's rocking that way, you've got a winning, a home run portfolio
I
company.
agree. Yeah.
All right. Well, Vince, thank you so much for your insights. It's fantastic hearing what you're up to. We may have to do a follow up and just see how things are going in a little bit, but really appreciate it. If you are a founder at a tech company and interested in, growing your business, money's money. You can get money anywhere, right? But to get the right kind of guidance and advice, I'm telling you, Vince is just really one of the smartest guys I know. So make sure you connect with him on LinkedIn. All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Cindy.